So Dion, what surprised you about the stock market in 2023?
Everybody was surprised by what happened in the stock market in 2023. I did a story at the end of 2022 about how just about every major investment bank on Wall Street was predicting that we had a recession this year. Some asset managers thought that the stock market would rally anyway, that the Federal Reserve would start cutting rates, and that would lead to some decent returns for the market. But I don't think anyone saw the blowout returns we saw this year. The NASDAQ rising around 40% this year, really recouping all of its 2022 losses. The S&P 500 really outperforming, rising more than 20%. And the rise of the Magnificent Seven, right? These seven big name tech stocks that really drove things, delivering huge returns for companies like Meta and Nvidia, over 200% returns this year. So a lot of folks could have been bullish coming into the year, thinking, okay, this will be a decent year for stocks, maybe it'll be an average year for stocks, but I don't think anyone saw the blowout year that we had this year coming.
Now, along with stocks, a lot of eyes are on the economy. We've been hearing the term soft landing a lot. What does that mean, and why is it important to the stock market?
A soft landing means the Federal Reserve can get inflation down to around its target without causing too much damage to the labor market or the overall economy. Inflation reached a high of over 9% in summer of 2022, and the Fed really sprung into action trying to get inflation down back towards its 2% target. And that's what 2023 has really been all about. So the idea of a soft landing is inflation is the plane that's way up in the air, and you want to get it back down to its 2% target without the damage of a hard landing, which would be damage to the labor market, damage to the economy. Growth slows, hiring slows, and maybe even turns negative and you have a recession. That's really what we have seen for 2023, is as inflation has come back down. It's now closer to 3%, not quite at 2, but much closer. So inflation's come down, and we have seen continued strength in the labor market. We saw the best growth during the third quarter that we had seen in years. The U.S. economy is actually expected to grow about 6 times as fast as the Fed predicted at the beginning of the year. So soft landing really was what we saw, and that's been great for the stock market because it's shown that the Fed is able to get inflation back down without causing damage to the rest of the economy.
In the big three markets, the Dow, the S&P 500, and the NASDAQ, each reached 52-week highs in December. Do economists see that rally continuing in 2024?
Economists are actually a bit unsure if the rally can continue, but I will tell you that stock investors, asset managers, and strategists are pretty bullish. You've got some price targets, folks expecting new all-time highs for the S&P 500 in 2024, potentially reaching as high as 5,000, 5,500. There's a lot of enthusiasm when it comes to the market side. Economists who study what's going on in labor markets, what's happening in the real economy, they're a bit more cautious right now.
Anything on your radar that could short-circuit the expected rally in 2024?
The biggest thing I've seen is just the decline in revenues while you're seeing an increase in profits. So one thing that I've recently been seeing is, if you look at the third quarter earnings reports, you had a lot more companies exceeding earnings expectations than you did have exceeding revenue expectations. Basically what that means is companies were turning a profit even though they weren't necessarily selling more things. So they were making a profit in essence by cutting costs. And that's great if you've got a bloated balance sheet, if you're paying too much for things. But at some point, if your company's going to grow, and that's what Wall Street wants, right? Because the stock market is really a measure of growth. If you're going to grow, you need to sell more stuff, you need to earn more revenue. And these companies were doing it and creating their profits largely by making cuts. So we'll see if that can continue.
Why is that significant to somebody with a stock portfolio or a 401k?
Because the stock market is all about growth. For stock prices to continue to rise, companies need to continue to grow. And as we're in this new environment where interest rates are higher, where it costs more money to borrow things, companies can't just buy back their stocks or use some of these tricks that they've used in recent years to move the stock price higher. They really do have to generate more sales, create more revenue, and do things like that to juice the bottom line. So it's going to be interesting as we move forward into 2024 whether companies can generate organic revenue growth and really grow the old-fashioned way.
And as you said earlier, inflation coming down steadily has been good news for the Federal Reserve. The Fed's become more comfortable with that track and has caused them to talk about lowering interest rates potentially in 2024. What effect would that have in particular on tech stocks?
The value of tech stocks, and therefore the stock price, is all about what these companies can do in the future. A lot of them don't make a lot of money now, and we're not talking about the big companies like Meta, Amazon, but some of those smaller tech names. The growth there, the stock price there, is all about what investors expect them to do in the future. And if it costs more money to grow because you have to borrow money and the cost of borrowing that money is much higher, that really brings down or reins in the stock price. So what investors are looking for when it comes to the Fed is when the Fed lowers rates, it's cheaper for companies to borrow money. And that's especially important for these big tech companies that A, borrow a lot of money, and B, are expected to grow a lot in the future. If you're planning to grow and you can borrow money cheaply, there's a lot more runway for you to grow and for your stock price to rise. But if it's going to cost a lot of money for you to borrow, and that's going to keep you from doing other things because you have to put that money towards servicing debt, paying back money you've borrowed, well, that's going to reduce the amount that investors can expect you to grow as a company. So when the Fed lowers interest rates, that can have a direct impact on just how high their stock price can go and how much investors expect the company overall to grow. So the big picture here is just that as the Fed lowers rates, which is what investors are predicting will happen next year, that gives a boost and a jolt to these tech companies because their valuations in the future can rise.
A lot of our listeners will be watching the ball drop in Times Square on New Year's Eve. But before they do that, they should listen to the next episode of WSJ's Take on the Week because it's crystal ball time. You're looking ahead to what's in store for our money in 2024, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We talked with David Kelly. He is the Chief Global Strategist at JP Morgan Asset Management. And he talked about what retail investors and everyday individual investors should be doing as they head into the end of the year and look forward to 2024.
Well, the first thing is to ask themselves really serious questions about when do they need the money? Because people tend to try to make all these short-term decisions about long-term money, and it's just not sensible. If this is truly, money for your 401k or your retirement, and those dollars you're actually not going to spend probably for 20, 30 years, then you can put them in long-term assets.
To hear more of that conversation with David Kelly, listen to WSJ's Take on the Week, this and every Sunday, wherever you get your podcasts. Dion, thanks for being with us.
Hey, Jared, thanks so much for having me.
And that's it for your Money Briefing. We'll be off on New Year's Day, but we'll be back on Tuesday morning with WSJ's Julia Carpenter to discuss how to not overspend in 2024. This episode was produced by Ariana Osperu. I'm your host, J.R. Whalen. Our supervising producer is Melanie Roy. Aisha Al-Muslim is our development producer. Scott Salloway and Chris Zinsley are our deputy editors. And Falana Patterson is the Wall Street Journal's head of news audio. Thanks for listening, and Happy New Year.
You're listening to Shortwave from NPR.
Hey Shortwavers, Regina Barber here, and this time I brought Jeff Grumville, Senior Editor and Science Desk Correspondent, to the show. Hey Jeff.
Hi there.
And All Things Considered host, Ari Shapiro.
The interloper returns.
Okay, so normally we talk through three things that are happening in the science world, fresh off the journals and social media that's happening this week. But this time we're giving you three big things in science from this year.
We'll pick through kind of the top three science threads we saw in schooling.
We have the science discoveries happening from the James Webb Space Telescope.
Fresh off the COP28 conference, we'll talk climate.
But we'll start with another really big theme, artificial intelligence. All on today's episode of Shortwave, the science podcast from NPR.
Support for NPR and the following message come from State Farm. As a State Farm agent and agency owner, Lakeisha Gaines is passionate about empowering other small businesses.
In the last several years, there are more business owners than we can count. Businesses are opening up quite frequently, and I think that shows the need, the dreams and the desires of the community to have the independence and to have the financial freedom that's important to them. The reason why it's so important to me to be out there to share information and to educate the community is because I know that a dream doesn't always help you to be successful. You need the competency, you need the wisdom, you need the knowledge. That's where we come in as State Farm agents. Our ability to be able to teach over 100 years of experience in this world to say, hey, we got you. You got this, and we got this. Let's do it together.
Talk to your local agent about small business insurance from State Farm. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
Okay, RA, should we start with the big one, AI?
Yes, it was everywhere this year, and it seems like everybody was afraid that ChatGPT was going to put them out of a job, no matter what kind of job they had. So, eager to hear what you've got.
Yeah, so let's talk about medicine for a minute. The AI revolution was already well underway in medicine before ChatGPT showed up. People have been developing algorithms to do things like diagnose diseases and scams and things like that. But with the language models, things are going even further. Some companies are floating systems to try and streamline medical notes and patient records. Others are rolling out programs that can generate correspondence between doctors and patients, and that's got some researchers nervous. I spoke to Marzieh Gassemi, who's at MIT and studies AI uses in healthcare. She cited one example where Microsoft has rolled out software to some hospitals that uses AI to write messages from doctors to their patients.
They're allowing it to draft this text as a suggestion of how a person should communicate with their patient. And that worries me.
Because it really hasn't been tested, and we know AI can suffer from hallucinations, basically just make stuff up. It can give misleading information. And there's bias in the training sets that can discriminate sort of unconsciously against different groups of people. But the fact of the matter is there's so much pressure on doctors in the medical system that these sorts of tools are going to get tried, and that's what's happening.
Yeah, and in the sciences, AI is already starting to find its place, specifically in fields like chemistry and biology, where researchers have like a huge number of molecules and compounds to test. It can try to find ones that match the researcher's criteria, and people can synthesize the candidate chemicals or compounds in real life to see whether they work. And some labs are taking things a step further. Researchers at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory in California and Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh have built robots that can do some of the synthesis and testing themselves, potentially further cutting down on time.
You know, as long as I've been alive, I've heard that STEM careers come with guaranteed jobs. What does it mean if AI can do advanced chemistry? I mean, are scientists going to be out of work?
Yeah, I've been thinking about jobs a lot this year as I've been reporting, and I keep coming up against this sort of basic truth, whether AI is being used in medicine, science, or even things like surveillance and national security. It always seems like it comes back to the fact that it works best with a human in the loop. I spoke to Sasha Lugioni, a researcher at an AI company called Hugging Face, and she put it this way.
I don't see generative AI models replacing people, but I can see them, helping people or being used by people in their existing jobs in order to go faster or to be to have more creative ideas.
And our colleagues at Planet Money really saw this firsthand. They used AI to make a series of episodes, and it worked. I mean, it did a lot of the work for them, but it worked best when they were giving it feedback. So I think that's something that, we can hold out some hope that they're not just going to take our jobs, the bots.
Okay, well, our second big topic is climate. What have you got for us?
Yeah, so 2023 was a hot year. So hot that once all the data is in, it's expected to be announced that this year was the hottest on record.
And I know scientists say if we want to avoid the most catastrophic effects of climate change, humans need to keep global temperatures from increasing more than 1.5 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial levels. How close are we to that number right now?
The average temperature of the Earth over the last decade was about 1 degree Celsius higher than pre-industrial temperatures, so we're definitely getting close.
Yeah, and earlier this year, our colleague on the climate desk, Rebecca Herscher, she reported that to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, humans would have to slash greenhouse gas emissions more than 40% by 2030.
And we're not on track to do that.
Yeah, even the most ambitious plans to cut emissions wouldn't get to zero by 2050. So you're right, it's unlikely. But it's not like a cliff where humans are doomed as soon as we reach 1.5 degrees Celsius. We still have a lot of power to limit the negative impacts of climate change.
Well, right, a cliff implies that you either go over it or you don't. But if we don't hit 1.5, we have to keep it below 2. And if we don't keep it below 2, we have to keep it below 2. Like, it keeps getting worse, right?
Yeah, I mean, that is stressful, but I do want to say it's not all doom and gloom. Like, humans are taking action around the globe, and NPR covered some of those efforts during our Climate Solutions Week, like how Uruguay is using wind power and other green energy sources to help power their grid, 98% of the country's grid.
Okay, we'll take hope from Uruguay. Let's leave this planet for a moment and check in on the James Webb Space Telescope, which continued sending back incredible images this year. Gina, you reported on what this means for astronomy.
Yeah, so this telescope has given astronomers a view into the early universe, like showing us the earliest galaxies, black holes, stars that we've ever seen. And what they look like is shocking to scientists because they are way more grown up than scientists like astrophysicist Jorge Moreno expected.
It's like if you went to a kindergarten and you saw a teenager.
For perspective, I mean, galaxies were thought to form about 1 billion years after the Big Bang, you know, given the universe is around 13.7 billion years old in total. But now JWST is really testing that hypothesis.
Yeah, and also to put these discoveries in perspective, another astrophysicist, Priya Natarajan, pointed out that we have already detected the oldest galaxy, the oldest black hole, just since JWST started its science operations last year. So she's pretty sure we'll discover more record breakers in 2024.
Temperature records on climate, age records on black holes. It's a year of records.
Ari, thanks for hanging out with us.
Yeah, thanks.
Always a pleasure.
Before we head out, the end of the year is here, and we're reminiscing a bit here at Shortwave. We've loved bringing you stories and interviews about time, AI, and moon landing attempts in 2023. And we're excited about everything we'll dig into in 2024, hopefully with your financial support.
This is where we want to say a big thank you to all our Shortwave Plus supporters and anyone listening who already donates to public media.
Your support makes journalism possible, and that goes beyond just reporting news. We report on events from the perspectives of people living through them and elevate voices that would otherwise go unheard.
And if you're listening and not yet a supporter right now, get behind the NPR network, especially with newsrooms gearing up for an important election year. Supporting public media now takes just a few minutes and makes a real difference in what's possible moving forward.
So join NPR Plus, or make a tax-deductible donation now at donate.npr.org/shortwave. This episode was produced by Rachel Carlson and Kai Mackman. It was edited by Catherine Fox, Amina Khan, and our showrunner, Rebecca Ramirez. Brett Hansen checked the facts, and the audio engineers were Robert Rodriguez and Kwesi Lee.
I'm Jeff Brumfield.
And I'm Regina Barber. Thanks for listening to Shortwave from NPR.
This message comes from NPR sponsor, American Express Business. The enhanced Amex Business Gold Card is packed with benefits, like 4 times points that adapt to your top 2 eligible spending categories every month, on up to $150,000 in purchases per year, and up to $395 in annual statement credits on eligible purchases at select business merchants. The Amex Business Gold Card, now smarter and more flexible. Terms apply. Learn more at americanexpress.com/businessgoldcard.
You're listening to Shortwave from NPR.
Hey Shortwavers, Regina Barber here, and this time I brought a very special guest, all things considered host extraordinaire, Elsa Chang. Hey Elsa.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
Oh, you're welcome anytime. We're a few days away from the end of the year. Like 2024 is upon us.
I mean, and thank God, because I am so glad to have 2023 in my rear view mirror.
Yeah, you know what, me too. But it hasn't actually all been bad. As the year winds down, we've been taking a look back at our favorite stories that aired on All Things Considered this year, right?
Yeah, and actually we noticed that we did quite a few stories about the science behind music, which I am now wrapping with a bow and gifting to you. You're welcome, Gina.
Oh, thank you so much. These are 2 of my favorite topics, so I can't wait to hear them. Today on the show, Elsa brings us 3 stories.
That's right, about music and wonder, why lead vocalists have actually become quieter, and how animals respond to music too.
You're listening to Shortwave, the science podcast from NPR.
This message comes from Apple Card. Reboot your credit card with Apple Card. It gives you unlimited daily cash back that can earn 4.25% annual percentage yield when you open a savings account. A high-yield, low-effort way to grow your money with no fees. Apply for Apple Card now in the Wallet app on iPhone. Apple Card subject to credit approval. Savings is available to Apple Card owners, subject to eligibility. Savings accounts by Goldman Sachs Bank USA. Member FDIC. Terms apply.
All right, Elsa, where does this first story take place?
Okay, Canada. So, let's start with an international trip.
I love Canada.
Good.
I just wonder how about the modern colored book.
Because NPR's Rob Stein visited the Montreal International Jazz Festival, and it got him wondering, why does music move us? So he called up an expert.
Music does evoke a sense of wonder and awe for lots of people.
Daniel Levitin is a neuroscientist at McGill University. He scans the brains of people while they listen to tunes.
Some of it is still mysterious to us, but what we can talk about are some neural circuits or networks. Those are involved in the experience of pleasure and reward. If you're thirsty and you get a drink, if you're feeling randy and you have sex, if you're listening to music that you really like. This pleasure center comes online,
triggering the production of brain chemicals that are involved in feelings like pleasure.
It modulates levels of dopamine as well as opioids in the brain. Your brain makes opioids.
Neurons in the brain even actually fire with the beat of the music, which helps people feel connected to one another by literally synchronizing their brain waves when they listen to the same song.
What we used to say in the
driving prices higher that the SEC could approve a new ETF. These are funds that track things like a group of stocks or an index. A common one tracks the S&P 500's ups and downs. Well, several companies want to start ETFs that would track the price of Bitcoin, and I asked Kevin Warbach, who's a professor at Wharton, why that would be significant.
It would potentially open up the door to lots and lots of people who say, look, I don't buy this entire crypto story, but Bitcoin sounds interesting.
And if the SEC approves it, a Bitcoin ETF would be another way into crypto, Ari, and it would also give crypto some more legitimacy.
Huh, so where do you think things are headed in 2024?
Of course, I don't know for sure, but clearly if the SEC approves that new investment product, it would be another big moment in crypto's still pretty short history. What we do know is that regulators and law enforcement are going to continue to go after crypto. Just a few weeks after Sam Bankman-Fried was convicted, the Department of Justice announced a major settlement with Binance, which was once one of FTX's competitors. Binance's founder, now former CEO Changpeng Zhao, who's better known as CZ, pleaded guilty to violating anti-money laundering laws. So we have two of what were the biggest names in crypto now facing prison time. I asked the acting Assistant Attorney General Nicole Argentieri what law enforcement's approach to crypto is going to be in the new year. And here's what she told me.
Thanks for that question. I would say stay tuned, but we expect to continue our robust enforcement.
So that means in 2024, there's likely to be more of this tension we've seen this year between crypto trying to stage a comeback and the government continuing this clampdown.
Okay, my last question is, why do these crypto titans all go by their initials? SBF, CZ, what's going on?
That is a great question, and it doesn't make it any easier for me to keep track of them.
NPR's David Gura. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Ari.
Public libraries around the country have put together lists of books most borrowed by readers in 2023. NPR's Netta Ulabi tells us more.
Let's start with the country's biggest library.
Hi there, I'm Emily Pullen. I'm the manager of reader services for the New York Public Library. We had Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmis as our #1 checkout.
The novel tells the story of a chemist in the early 1960s who's dismissed because of her gender. She ends up hosting a cooking show.
We're live in 5, 4.
It was made into a series on Apple TV+.
Welcome, viewers. This is Supper at 6.
Lessons in Chemistry was also the most borrowed book at public libraries in Seattle, Boston, and Cleveland. However, in Topeka, Kansas, it was not even on the top 10. Readers there preferred mysteries, thrillers, and what's getting called romantasy.
Romantasy is this new phrase that they've come up with for romance and fantasy.
Deb Lambert directs collections at the Indianapolis Public Library. She says romantasy is big there too, with books like Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. It was also among the most borrowed in Charleston, South Carolina, and Louisville, Kentucky, thanks in part to fan videos on TikTok.
They have to be endgame, right? They have to be. The dragons have made it.
Not every library lists its most borrowed books, and there's no big list from, say, the American Library Association. Most borrowed, says Deb Lambert, can get sliced into fiction, nonfiction, young adult, audio.
And also whether it was an ebook or a physical book.
The #1 most borrowed ebook in 2023 nationally on the app Libby was a memoir.
Once upon a time, this was going to be my forever home.
Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, reading from Spare about his former estate.
When my wife and I fled this place, in fear for our sanity and physical safety, I wasn't sure when I'd ever come back.
Library users have turned not just to e-books, but e-magazines. Deb Lambert says their rise in popularity is dramatic.
Our New Yorker e-magazine was actually the most checked out title of everything online.
In 2023, in Indianapolis, the New Yorker was bigger than Spare. Bigger than Lessons in Chemistry.
By a pretty good amount, yep. Lessons in Chemistry had a total of 6,300 checkouts, and New Yorker Magazine was 6,800 checkouts.
There's an important function to these most borrowed lists, librarians say. They remind us there's something wonderful to read every year for everyone. Netta Ulabi, NPR News.
You're listening to All Things Considered from NPR News.
comes from Ohio University, tied for the state's #1 school for fine arts graduate programs per U.S. News. Creating a vibrant arts community in Southeast Ohio. Learn more at ohio.edu/fine-arts. That's ohio.edu/fine-arts.
I'm Stephen Dubner. On the next Freakonomics Radio, here's how many of us feel about air travel.
Jet lag sucks. Being stuck in a tiny seat sucks.
But instead, should we think about it as a miracle?
Simply to push a single plane back from a gate, there's about 1,200 things that have to happen sequentially.
That's next time on Freakonomics Radio.
Sunday afternoons at 4 and Tuesday nights at 11 on 91.7 WVXU.
Support for WVXU comes from the Legal Aid Society of Greater Cincinnati. Legal Aid works to reduce poverty and provides effective legal assistance to help families obtain stable, affordable housing, employment, and safety. To learn more about its mission and provide support, visit lascinti.org.
Whether you're an early bird or set multiple alarms, on the go, or starting your day at home, make Morning Edition from NPR News part of your morning routine. Listen weekdays.
On 91.7 WVXU, with host Marianne Zalesnik.
Support for NPR comes from this station, and from Jarl and Pamela Moan, focusing on civil liberties, foster youth, public radio, and the arts. From the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, supporting books, radio, podcasts, film, television, theater, and more to bridge science and the humanities. And from Heather Sturt-Haga and Paul G. Haga, supporting African Wildlife Foundation, working to ensure wildlife and wild lands thrive in modern Africa. Learn more at awf.org.
This is All Things Considered from NPR News. I'm Juana Summers.
And I'm Ari Shapiro. As we head into the new year, maybe you have a few things on your to-do list that have been there for months. Well, we have some tips to help you clear through that list and maybe even jumpstart those New Year's resolutions. NPR Life Kit's host Mariel Segura spoke with some experts about how to write and tackle a to-do list to make it work for you.
So, to-do lists. They're a tool we use to get stuff done, right? And I mean, how good does it feel when you finally cross off that task that's been hanging over your head? But warning, to-do lists can also become a trap. They can feed our impulse to stay productive at all times. The thing is, we don't want to make a better to-do list just so we can indiscriminately accomplish more. It's about doing what matters. That's Angel Trinidad, the CEO and founder of Passion Planner, a company that makes digital and paper planners that show people how to break down their goals into day-to-day actions. You can access a free version of the planner on their website. So, takeaway number 1 in making a better to-do list, as Angel was saying, decide what matters to you in this moment. Because wouldn't it be great to fill our to-do lists with intention, so the stuff on them is actually helping us get somewhere? One way to do this is to come up with a big picture goal, something that's especially important to you right now, something that would make a big impact in your life. Angel calls it a game changer.
What is that one thing that would make everything easier, better? And that answer is different for everyone.
To come up with that goal, ask yourself some questions.
What do I want to be? What do I want to experience? And what do I want to have?
Maybe you want to be more present in your physical body. If so, your goal could be to run a 5K. Or maybe you want to give back to your community. So your goal is to volunteer once a week. First though, I want to acknowledge this goal-making approach might feel kind of top-down. Like maybe you don't have a big picture goal in mind yet. And that's okay. Oliver Burkeman is a journalist and author. He wrote the book 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals. That's how many weeks are in the average human life, by the way. And he says another option is to let your current to-do list guide you.
There are various exercises out there, like you might know the one that involves asking why 5 times in succession.
For instance, my to-do list says retile kitchen floor. Oliver says I could work backwards from there.
So like, I want to retile my floor, why? To make that room look better, why? And you know, eventually you hopefully get to something that feels like a bedrock value of your life, and if you don't, maybe that's a sign that it's a kind of a zombie project that could be easily abandoned.
Once you have a sense of your priorities and your goals, it's time for takeaway 2. Pick a system, a way of making a to-do list that works for you. One question to get you started: paper or digital? Angel says some people like paper to-do lists because they're concrete and tactile.
And what I also love about to-do lists on paper is when you cross it off, there's nothing like it.
Also, paper comes to an end.
When you put it digitally, there's no end. You can keep going. And I think that's when to-do lists get really overwhelming. It's kind of like a cluttered room. When it's too much, then you just avoid it completely.
Digital has its pluses, though. If you make a to-do list on your phone, it's searchable and quite possibly more organized. Another question to ask yourself: how do you want to structure your to-do list? Some people prefer a kind of calendar approach with the hours of the day listed.
I like to time block on my agenda, and it's literally making a square of time for the task.
So, Thursday from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. I'll be working on my novel. Wednesday from 7 to 8 p.m. I'll be at soccer practice. This method is called time boxing, and it can be a good way to understand how much you could realistically tackle in a day, since you're visually blocking off time for each of your to-dos.
That kind of awareness gets you thinking, am I spending my time in a way that makes sense for me and what my intention is for my life?
But again, this is about finding a system that works for you. For Oliver, trying to plan this way feels too rigid.
I've never really found it works to make a very rigorous association between a task and the time of day, because my moods, my responsibilities as a parent, random emergencies that arise, you just can't sort of say, I'm absolutely going to be doing this thing between 3 and 3:40. You have to with appointments and things, but if you try and do it with everything, very quickly it feels imprisoning. It feels like life isn't any fun anymore, even if you're working on things that matter.
So another option is a straight-up list of tasks. Call me old-fashioned, but that's what I'm sticking with. Remember, by the way, whatever you pick, it's just a starting point.
An important thing here is to feel like your systems for organizing your life can evolve constantly.
Now, once you have a system in mind, takeaway 3, it's time to fill your list. Let's start with an acknowledgement. There are some things you just have to get done.